Coming up on this V12 production special, bizarre trains. First, a machine simply known as the Brick. Then, this might be the biggest weed whacker I have ever seen. And we all know trains haul big loads, but this is one for the record books. Plus, the record-breaking train you've probably never heard of. And why do these rails appear to be on fire? All that and so much more is next on this V12 production special. Hello and welcome to this V12 production special, and thanks for joining us. Today we're talking about trains and things on the railroad that are a little bit unusual, from specialized pieces of maintenance equipment to locomotives and rail cars that have been adapted to new tasks after their normal service lives have ended. Now, some of this specialized equipment may not turn the heads of seasoned railroaders, but for the rest of us, it's pretty weird stuff. We'll begin with a strange-looking machine that's nicknamed the Brick. Foreign power from Kansas City Southern, now known as CPKC, rumbles toward Norfolk Southern's Inman Yard in Atlanta, Georgia. KCS engines are actually a pretty common sight in Atlanta, but the equipment down here is not. It's part of one of Norfolk Southern's track geometry trains. And that thing that kind of looks like a locomotive is nicknamed the Brick. It, along with the coach behind it, NS-36, travels all around the Norfolk Southern system, looking for track defects and gathering data. Now, the Brick was once a Norfolk & Western SD40, and the research car was once a Santa Fe business coach, according to the website altoonaworks.info. Alright, let's take a look at this thing in action. It's 2016, and we're on 6th Street in Augusta, Georgia. When you hear this city's name, the famed Masters Golf Tournament may come to mind, but for rail fans, this town is known for its street running. For nearly a mile, Norfolk Southern trains cruise down this road at 5 miles per hour as they make their way into and out of the state of Georgia. South Carolina is over there, on the other side of the Savannah River. And by the way, the trains don't have to stop at any traffic lights. The track geometry train is pulled by standard Norfolk Southern diesels. This low-angle shot shows some of the technology in use. Now, I can't identify all the stuff down here, but we can see sensors mounted on the Brick's trucks and on one end of NS-36. Behind that big window, there's theater-style seating with desks for crew members. Norfolk Southern's rail network is pretty big, and they actually have another track geometry train that looks similar to this one. Here's NS-34 sitting in the Gulch in downtown Atlanta. It looks a lot like a slug. Well, that's because it used to be one. According to the website altoonaworks.info, before becoming part of this NS track geometry train, it was a Norfolk & Western slug, and before that, it was an N&W SD35. I'm not sure about the origins of NS33 that's coupled behind it. Looking at the back end of the Brick, we can see it has an exhaust stack for its generator. That generator supplies its power and the power for the coach behind it. NS36 has quite a lighting setup at the rear, and a horn. They've installed some LED light bars since I last saw it in 2016. Of course, both pieces of equipment are painted in that distinctive Tuscan red color. Geometry cars, like the ones in this set, are operated by the railroad's engineering department, more specifically track inspection and development. The sensors on board see things that the human eye can't. Now, one of the most common testing methods to detect defects uses ultrasonic technology. These images, courtesy of the FRA's Track Inspector Rail Defect Reference Manual, show the unseen issues that can develop inside steel rails. Early inspection vehicles used an older testing method, pioneered by Sperry Rail Service, involving induction, which creates a magnetic field in the rail. According to a video posted on Norfolk Southern's YouTube channel in 2018, these train sets operate up to 4 times per year in high-traffic areas or areas with curves. They say the raw data the equipment generates is stored on removable hard drives, with the most important data transmitted wirelessly to Norfolk Southern servers. Equipment used on the track geometry cars includes pulse lasers, line scan cameras, accelerometers, and inertial equipment. So you may only see a train like this one a few times a year, but we've all probably seen workers in high rail trucks performing visual inspections. They're required by the FRA to do this at least twice a week on busy main lines. So what does the future of track inspection look like? According to an article and video posted on Norfolk Southern's website in March of 2020, they are developing a system that is autonomous and can be mounted on a conventional locomotive. The company says it allows them to use an existing asset in revenue service to inspect rail while pulling loaded trains at track speed. Furthermore, NS says the system will supplement its existing fleet of geometry cars and high rail trucks. Of course, technology like that won't be as impressive to look at as the brick. There's no doubt a railroad's track is absolutely fundamental and critical to its operations, and these odd-looking machines keep things running and safe. I've also seen the brick's equally bizarre-looking counterpart, NS-34, running on the main line. It was pulled by a locomotive with the worst horn I have ever heard. Love it or hate it, yard work is something you have to do to keep your property looking good, but how do railroads keep overgrowth and brush off the tracks? Well, one company uses what I would describe as a giant weed whacker. Okay, so the railroad needs to do a little landscaping along its right-of-way, but off-the-shelf lawn and garden tools just won't work. Well, that's where this thing comes in. It looks like a giant weed whacker, but the more technical term would be brush cutter. A CSX maintenance of way crew had some track time here in Decatur, Georgia on its Abbeville subdivision today. Warnings all over the machine say to stay back 300 feet, and I would suggest you pay attention if you ever see one of these out in the wild. Here's the aftermath. Okay, so its work is done for the day, so here's the business end of this brush cutter. It's powered by a medium-sized diesel engine, and the operator sits in a well-protected cab. When it comes to rail equipment, this thing certainly will not win any size competitions, but it's still one of the many tools the railroad uses to get the job done. The next bizarre machine we're going to look at helps to keep the rails in good condition. It's much bigger than the brush cutter and creates a whole lot of sparks. 7:45 on Saturday morning in Chamblee, Georgia. Regular folks are probably sleeping in, but this train crew is getting its day started. This mother slug set is definitely starting to show its age. The equipment and rails in this area are also well used. Dozens of trains pound the main line next to the yard here every day. There's no doubt that wears out the tracks, so your first question might be, do the rails need to be replaced after so much tonnage has passed over them? Well, not yet. There's actually a machine here today that's been called in to help extend the life of those tracks by restoring the profile of the railhead and removing defects, among other things. It's operated by Loram, a company that's been in the maintenance of way business since the 1950s and grinding rails since the 70s. And by the way, it has machines operating all over the world. There are actually 2 Loram trains operating here on this hot July morning. The longer one handles tangent and curved track, while this shorter train grinds grade crossings and switches. Now that both trains are out on the main line, let's watch one work. This is one of Loram's RG400 series production rail grinders. We're now set up in Doraville, which is just down the road from Chamblee. Before you can even see it, the smoke in the air and the grinding noises suggest there is nothing standard about this train. There are a lot of moving parts here, and I thought the best way to showcase this thing was in slow motion at 120 frames per second. As you can see, the rail grinder throws off a lot of sparks, so if you see one, make sure you record it from a safe distance away. Now, the grinding stones on this production rail grinder are housed in these buggies, which can be raised and lowered. You can see they have spark guards and blankets on the sides to help prevent fires along the right-of-way. Railroads can choose between 60 and 120 stone configurations. According to Loram marketing materials, this machine can grind at speeds up to 20 miles per hour. Like other maintenance of way operations, they have to maximize the amount of track time they get out here. We're now back in Chambly, and as a MARTA train passes on its elevated tracks, we can see another critical system on the rail grinder. I'm talking about some of the equipment they use to prevent fires. Here, you can see water shooting out of the nozzles near the front of the train. One thing to note is that they actually stop grinding as they pass over this switch. After that, the water is back on and the grindstones are turning. As you can probably guess, with all the sparks this thing puts out, it's capable of starting small fires. Fortunately, they're prepared. According to LORAM, the train's custom-built water cars can hold up to 25,000 gallons, and the consist itself can carry up to 75,000 gallons of water. Oh, and in case you're wondering, this thing does have a horn and bell. It also has a siren, but I didn't hear that today. It's tough to see those grindstones in action, but you can see some spares hanging on the side of the train, ready to go. The amount of water this train puts out is pretty amazing, but so is the amount of lighting all around. No doubt, it can operate during the day and at night. And here's the result of its work. Look at all that steam coming up off the tracks. At this point, it looked like the rail grinder was backing up and getting ready to make another pass somewhere. You can see those buggies that house the grindstones that I mentioned earlier have been raised. There's also a switch here. While we take this short break, let's look at the profile of a rail. As you can see, it's actually curved on the top. These images, courtesy of the Library of Congress and the American Folklife Center, show us what brand new rail looks like. There's no debating, steel wheels on steel rails are efficient, but they can also inflict damage on those rails, especially if the wheels themselves aren't in optimal condition. In the book Railway Maintenance, the Men and Machines That Keep the Railroads Running, the author probably said it best. Since the purpose of grinding is to prolong rail life and improve railroad efficiency, rail grinders are designed to shave as little metal off the rail as possible. According to that book, many railroads have taken a preventative approach to rail grinding instead of a corrective one. That means the railhead can be reconditioned and surface defects can be removed before there's a problem that needs to be fixed. So far, we've seen a whole lot of sparks, but we haven't actually been able to get a good look at the grinding stones spinning. Fortunately, we can look at this diagram from a LORAM patent to get a basic understanding of how they work. The patent images here are from 1986, but the general concept of rail grinding hasn't changed much since then. Okay, we're now in a part of Metro Atlanta called Brookhaven, and it appears one of its residents is inspecting the rails before the grinder arrives. So far, we've only seen the grinder operating on straight track, but curves actually get worn down faster, especially the outside rails, which receive a lot of pressure from the train wheels and their flanges. Now, hawks are birds of prey, but they're no match for the rail grinder. How about the timing on this flyby? Oh, and by the way, LORAM says it uses environmentally friendly hydraulic fluid and has robust dust collection systems on its machines. Now we get an overhead view of this awesome piece of equipment in action. And here's a look at the back of the rail grinder, spraying more water on the rails and ties. This is known as the support car and houses a workroom and rail profile measurement system. And in front of that, there's a power car. The grinders on the train spin using 30 horsepower electric motors. So that's a look at the RG400 series production rail grinder, but what about its smaller cousin? This is the RGS, specialty rail grinder. I don't have any footage of it in action, but my understanding is that it's used for grinding switches, crossings, and other areas where more precision is required, but it can also grind tangent and curved rails too. According to LORAM, this machine has 24 grindstone modules and can grind a switch or crossing in 2 to 5 minutes. There's also a 4,500-gallon water tank on board for fire suppression. Maintenance of way workers use all kinds of odd-looking equipment to fix and maintain the right-of-way. The little machines that track gangs rely on function like an assembly line as they roll along. Meanwhile, this ballast cleaner has everything it needs coupled into one unit. Of course, much of this equipment is purpose-built, but the trains you're about to see are pulled by almost unrecognizable former freight locomotives. The first one you're going to see is called a slot machine, but it's a long way from Las Vegas. Like its Las Vegas counterpart, this odd-looking machine has a lot of lights and makes a lot of noise. It's called a self-powered slot machine, or SPS, which seems like a fitting name. GREX on the front and sides stands for Georgetown Rail Equipment Company. It's now a part of Loram. Right now, the machine has a pretty straightforward job. Unload cross ties along Norfolk Southern's main line in Metro Atlanta. Now keep in mind, this is a busy part of the Norfolk Southern system, and they often have a limited amount of track time to get work like this done. They had already set out quite a few ties before they had to pause and let this train pass by. There's no doubt, railroads haul a lot of interesting and unusual cargo. The containers in the front of this train are carrying trash. There are also a lot of interesting and specialized businesses out there. Companies like Loram certainly qualify. They provide railroad maintenance of way services and equipment. Of course, there are also plenty of businesses along the tracks that serve very specific customers. See that parking lot near the rails here in Norcross, Georgia? Well, that business is called Cinema Vehicles, and as you might have guessed, they provide all kinds of cars, trucks, and buses to Georgia's booming film and television industry. Anyway, let's get back on track. We're now set up in downtown Norcross, and one more train needs to pass before we can get another look at the self-powered slot machine. Now, the slot machine was not moving all that fast today, and it was pretty easy to chase.
High rail past the 617.
There was also a high rail leading the way, calling out mileposts and other information.
1-to-1 at CP Norcross.
Next up, the main event, and they were making a whole lot of noise for these crossings in downtown Norcross. So what exactly do they use this train for? Well, according to Loram marketing materials, it can take on jobs involving heavy ditching, concrete or timber tie pickup, scrap rail pickup, ballast and sub-ballast stockpiling, tie distribution, and more. Oh, and what's the story behind this odd-looking locomotive? Well, according to those Loram marketing materials, it can travel up to 55 miles per hour and can be wirelessly controlled so a single operator can run it. But today, there was someone in the cab and in the excavator. Now, I'm not 100% sure what the heritage of this locomotive is, but it looks like it was made from an old electromotive Jeep. Unfortunately, we didn't really get the full slot machine experience today. The train we just watched was using old gondolas that have been relegated to maintenance of way service. These things are classics, with reporting marks from old railroads like Penn Central and Conrail. But the real selling point of the full slot machine is its specialized cars. They're basically articulated gondolas that don't have end bulkheads. This allows the excavator to travel the full length of the train on the floor of the cars. Now, the excavator we saw on the train today moves on top of the cross ties that are loaded inside these old gondolas. And when those are empty, it can dismount and park on this car at the rear. Now, if you thought that train was unusual, check out this yellow beast. It's called a multi-purpose machine, or MPM, and is operated by transportation infrastructure contractor Herzog. The slot machine and MPM can be used for the same tasks, but the design on the Herzog train is a little bit more unique in my opinion. The excavator here rides on rails built onto customized well cars. This thing also has cabs on both ends of the train. Anyway, back to the self-powered slot machine. They really put it to work during the first half of July 2022. It unloaded ties all over Metro Atlanta on Norfolk Southern's line that goes to Greenville, South Carolina. Eventually, a gang like this one will move in and start installing them. Now, you may be wondering why they call it a slot machine. Well, unfortunately, I don't have a great answer for you. The only clue I found was on an old Georgetown Railroad webpage. It said there were slots in the floor of the cars to give the excavator tracks more traction. But despite its funny name, ultimately, the slot machine is just another example of how the folks who work on the railroad get the job done. Now, both Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern have started to use larger converted 6-axle diesels in maintenance of way service. All right, let's move on. So before railroad employees get out on the high iron, they have to get a feel for the equipment they'll be working on. Well, that's where this Frankenstein Locomotive structure comes in. There are a few oddities at Norfolk Southern's training center in McDonough, Georgia. The one that stands out the most, this odd locomotive on stilts. It combines the back end of a GE with the rear of an EMD. Now, I'm a rail fan and not a railroader, but a viewer once told me that mechanical trainees were taught how to perform different tasks on it. I'd imagine it also helps to teach new employees how to safely mount and dismount locomotives. There's also some interesting historic equipment around here. They had a couple of old Southern high hood engines when I last visited. Also, a Norfolk and Western caboose. And how about this Conrail scale test car? Countless conductors, engineers, signal workers, and track workers have passed through here. It opened in 1974 and has been called the Railroad University. So far, we've spent a lot of time focusing on trains, but what about the tracks they ride on? This device helps to keep things moving in really cold conditions. In this video, courtesy of Metra, it looks like the tracks are on fire here in Chicago, but these are actually switch heaters. They use open flames to melt snow and ice to keep turnouts functioning at this busy interlocking. This ensures there are no delays during rush hour. The gas-fed heaters run parallel to the rails, and even though they use open flames, trains can still run over them safely. According to Metra, this setup is customized to this interlocking. And here's a shot of a similar system on the Long Island Railroad. Switch heaters using electricity or a combination of gas and electricity to keep switch points clear are more common than ones using open flames. Our next two segments have a nautical theme. Yeah, we're going out to sea. First, a train trip on board a ship. It's 2008 and we're in the middle of the Baltic Sea on a ferry from Denmark to Germany. There's plenty to see up here, but below deck is where things get interesting. That's right, there's a train park down here. Special ferries like this one haul cars, trucks, buses, and trains. The ship's bows can open, allowing all the vehicles to roll on and off. From the cab of this Danish IC3, you can see we've parked right up front and a tractor trailer is stopped right next to the train. These IC3s are relatively short. Longer trains have to be broken up. This video shows a Trenitalia train being loaded and unloaded from a ferry in the Strait of Messina. Here's the bow going down. And after its trip, the train cars are rolling off, back onto dry land. Train ferries and rail barges have been used for decades to transport passenger and freight cars. However, these operations are disappearing. The only two I'm aware of in the United States are in Alaska and New York and New Jersey. Now we're going to look at trains that are beneath the waves at the bottom of the ocean. It may be hard to believe, but transit cars like these are now deep underwater, serving as offshore artificial reefs. It's December 21st, 2023, and two cars that once worked for the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority are being dumped into the ocean. This video is courtesy of the Coastal Resources Division of the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. These 72-foot cars were cleaned thoroughly before being submerged, along with concrete culvert pipe. Ultimately, they'll rest on the bottom of the sea in about 60 feet of water. According to the Georgia DNR, the two cars will provide essential habitats for species like coral, fish, and other organisms. And scuba divers can also visit the site. Oh, and guess what? These are not the only rail cars that have been turned into reefs off Georgia's coast. Subway cars donated by the New York City MTA are also on the ocean floor. As you can see, these have been a big hit down here. Marine Life covers most of this car and, oh, whoa, we're going to need a bigger boat. Train. Of course, other vehicles have also been turned into reefs, including boats and even this tank. From the bottom of the ocean to outer space, trains are also used to get rockets to the launch pad. Welcome to the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. This is where they launched Sputnik, the little satellite that ignited the space race. It's September 2017, and this train, hauling the Soyuz MS-06 spacecraft and its Soyuz booster, is headed to the launch pad. Fully assembled, the Soyuz rocket is around 165 feet tall, and the Soyuz spacecraft itself is hidden inside a shroud at the top. It takes the train a few hours to slowly creep to the launch site. When it gets there, that huge green rail car will lift the rocket into its vertical launch position. Umbilical and service towers then surround the craft so crews can make final preparations for its trip to space. Eventually, this rocket would take 3 crew members, 1 Russian and 2 Americans, to the International Space Station.
And liftoff. Mark Vande Hei, Alexander Mazurkin, and Joe Acaba lifting off.
And check this out. As they head into space, you can see a little toy model of Sputnik. When it starts floating, that tells the crew they've entered zero gravity. You know, James Bond movies feature all kinds of bizarre and cool machines and gadgets. Remember that old Soviet missile train in GoldenEye that Bond later destroyed with a tank? Well, believe it or not, missile trains are actually a thing. Russia has used them, the US experimented with the idea, and now North Korea has shown the world its version of a mobile missile launcher on rails. It's September 2021 in North Korea, and a short train is emerging from a tunnel. It looks relatively conventional until people in hazmat suits emerge and the roof of one of the boxcars starts to open. What rises from the rail car is deadly, a short-range ballistic missile. A montage of different camera angles show its successful launch. The video then shows a second missile rise from the boxcar and blast off. Fortunately, this was all just a test, but it does raise some concerns. The website 38north.org analyzed this video that's from North Korean state media. They say trains like this could be disguised as civilian freight trains, could be hidden in tunnels or camouflaged on sidings, and decoy trains could also be deployed. Fortunately, Allied forces could indiscriminately attack rail lines to reduce the train's effectiveness. As I said, this video shows short-range ballistic missiles, which are commonly carried by large, all-terrain trucks. But the advantage of a rail vehicle is that it can carry heavier, long-range, intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs. But it's unclear if North Korea will be able to adapt its train to haul deadly cargo like that. We've probably all heard of the French TGV or Japanese Shinkansen. Various iterations of those trains are known for their record-breaking high speeds over the years, but there's one rail vehicle that broke a world record here in the United States, and it's pretty bizarre looking. What you're looking at here was called the LIMRV, or Linear Induction Motor Research Vehicle. As you've probably gathered, it was propelled by a linear induction motor, and that motor needed a lot of electricity. The LIMRV generated its own with a 3,000 horsepower gas turbine. It also needed a tall metal reaction rail in between the conventional rails for the linear induction motor to work. Testing was carried out in Pueblo, Colorado at the High Speed Ground Test Center. The vehicle could be operated with its onboard controls, but high-speed tests were unmanned. The researchers only had about 6 miles of track to work with, so 2 jet engines were eventually added to get the LIMRV up to speed. And it seems this addition was worth it. The vehicle still holds the world speed record for air-powered wheel-on-rail vehicles at 255.6 miles per hour. Unfortunately, this design didn't really catch on, but the LIMRV is still around. It's preserved at the Pueblo Railway Museum, and the museum's website was really helpful as I researched this topic. Oh, and by the way, this bizarre beast is also preserved in Pueblo. It was also developed in the 70s and is called the Tracked Levitated Research Vehicle, or TLRV. It rode on a U-shaped concrete track and worked like a hovercraft. Unlike the LIMRV, this thing did not set any world records. In fact, the highest speed it ever achieved was 91 miles per hour. While we're on the topic of world records, who do you call when you need a giant piece of fruit moved? The railroad, of course. This huge slice of watermelon is on the move. It's headed to its new home at Riverside Park in Muscatine, Iowa, and this footage is courtesy of the city of Muscatine. The sculpture weighs in at 16,000 pounds and is 40 feet long and 16 feet tall. The city says this is the world's largest watermelon, and I don't doubt it. This part of the country has sandy, well-drained soil, which is ideal for growing melons. Now, the only question I have is, what's the world's largest seed spitting contest going to look like? Steel wheels on steel rails got that unusual load to its destination, but many airports around the world and some transit systems rely on trains with rubber tires.
That is 1222 and 110 at 9 hour and flight is 29 left flight 2 clear for takeoff.
Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International, the world's busiest airport. Sure, the planes get all the attention here, but how do passengers get around once they're on the ground?
4651 Atlanta Tower 1208 runway 9 direct clear to land.
There are a few options, but probably the most interesting is called the plane train. But it's a little different than the trains you'll see at your local railroad crossing. First of all, it's automated. That means no driver is on board. However, there are folks here in the control room. But here's one of its most unique features, something you won't see up close when you're riding: these rubber tires. This is one of the original vehicles that entered service in 1980. 2 of these are preserved at the Southeastern Railway Museum in Duluth, Georgia. These are designated as C-100s, originally manufactured by Westinghouse. They have since been retired, but the design is still very similar to what you'd see today. A drawing from one of the patents shows how this thing works. Rubber tires roll on concrete guideways with a guide beam in the middle. Horizontal guide wheels mounted in the middle of the vehicle follow that beam and steer the car. This middle beam is also where the vehicle picks up electricity. The system is called an automated people mover and was pioneered by Westinghouse. Clues of the original manufacturer are still visible on this car. Looking under the vehicle, we can see the horizontal guide wheels have been removed. Also, check out these couplers, made by a company in what was then West Germany. And let's look at those tires one more time. Each vehicle has 4 sets of dual wheels that are the size of commercial truck tires. Now, back to the equipment that's currently operating at Atlanta's airport. According to Hartsfield-Jackson, they've got 59 Bombardier Innovia CX-100s. The system is operated and maintained by Bombardier Transportation. Now, Bombardier Transportation was recently acquired by French rolling stock manufacturer Alstom. Usually 4 cars are coupled together. Of course, the trains connect passengers with the different concourses at Atlanta's airport. Now, ATL was not the first airport to install a system like this. That designation goes to Tampa International. The first automated airport people mover started operating there in 1971. It was also built by Westinghouse. You can now find systems like this in airports around the world. Believe it or not, some cities have even incorporated this technology into their transit systems. A good example is the Miami Metro Mover. It began operations in 1986. Many systems around the world also use some degree of automation. And by the way, there are some large transit systems that use rubber tires on their trains. The best example is the Paris Metro. It introduced this concept on a large scale in the 1950s, but the concept has been around since the late 1920s. No surprise, it was the Michelin Tire Company that built the first prototype back then. Here they are showing off one of the iterations of their auto train in 1932. In addition to those automated people movers at the airport, I'm sure we've all seen tugs pushing a plane back from the gate. They're powerful machines that apparently are also capable of moving rail cars. The B&O and later Conrail used tugs on the streets of Baltimore, Maryland. The photos of these were taken in 1980. Machines like these are commonly called critters. They're typically used in small operations or on the properties of industries. Like most critters, this one has steel wheels, not rubber tires, and it's rusting away at a lumber yard in East Point, Georgia. These days, you're more likely to see a mobile railcar mover like this Trackmobile doing this kind of work. Okay, so the weirdest critter I've been able to find was this one, used by the US military. Here, an old truck's rubber tires were removed and replaced with steel wheels. Okay, we're reaching the end of the line for this V12 production special, so it's time for a few honorable mentions. Trains that are almost as bizarre as what we've seen so far. I've been on several motorcar excursions with members of NARCOA, which is the North American Railcar Operators Association. Now, some of the lines we've ridden have been pretty remote, and when nature calls, you've got to be prepared. So, on some trips, one of the motor cars tows a porta potty like this. I think I'd rather just go in the woods. Okay, from a porta potty on rails to what look like campers. Norfolk Southern uses these camp cars to house maintenance of way workers for days at a time when they're out on a job. And take a look at this. Yeah, the railroad also hauls rails. And these are long pieces of steel. This is called continuous welded rail, and yeah, it can bend as the train takes a curve. From steel rails to green pipes. Yeah, this train hauls nothing but pipe. I think this train was headed to the New Orleans area, but I don't know where the pipe was going after that. Thanks for watching this V12 production special. I hope you enjoyed it. In the end, I'm sure I'm only scratching the surface here. There are plenty of other bizarre trains that I didn't cover. If you have any suggestions for future videos, let me know in the comments. Anyway, that's it for now. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.